Hey, all right. Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay in getting started there. So this morning we're going to be doing a presentation on the Realist tax system. I did want to run through just a couple basics about the class before we get started. So everybody's going to be starting on mute by default. Wanted to clarify that we do have an option to allow you guys to ask a question with your voice, but primarily we want to make sure that you guys are getting all of your questions posted into the Q&A section down at the bottom of your screen. I also wanted to mention we do have a chat section. Looks like a couple of you guys are already in there. Thank you. The chat is going to be primarily for any commentary you guys would like to add, stories you want to share, anything that's just not a question. If you do end up having questions, again, make sure to put those under the Q&A section. But otherwise, if you guys would like to add or contribute in some way, that chat option is a great spot. Now, the session is going to be recorded. That means that we'll have a link that will be sent off after class is over today, including some extra tutorials and guides and stuff like that. So if you guys are interested in learning more about Realist, you can watch those videos. And then this afternoon from 1 to 2, we also have a CE credit class that's Advanced Matrix and Realist. But either way, we also do want to make sure that anybody that's having any kind of technical issues, trouble, whatever, please let us know as soon as possible. Chat, Q&A, hitting that raise hand button. We really don't care how you let us know. Just make sure that we're aware that you're having issues. You may not be the only one. And finally, this is not a CE credit class, but I did want to at least let you guys know that. We will be getting the CE credit for this afternoon's class sent off pretty quickly to OREC, but for some reason we do have some delays. I'm not sure where the delay is being caused, but if you guys haven't gotten your CE credit for some of the classes this month, I'm currently investigating that. So, all right. Now, the buttons that we have available are going to be down at the bottom of your screen. Again, chat for any commentary you'd like to add, Q&A for any questions you would like to ask. There is a raise hand option. This is more just to, we have some kind of casual polls that we'll be doing during the course, but primarily what'll end up happening is just if you do end up having a question and it might be a little bit cumbersome to type out, or if you guys are on a mobile device, you have to tap the screen and then you guys have buttons down at the bottom. But that raise hand option is still there. If you do want to ask a question with your voice, just hit that raise hand button during the normal course, and we can go ahead and get you unmuted and you can ask your question. But otherwise, that should be it. If you do end up having any technical issues that get you disconnected from the course, make sure that you guys get in contact with us at the service desk. This is also going to be your support team after class is over. So if you guys do end up needing to get some assistance, maybe you guys have forgotten some of this, falls out the back of your head as soon as class is over. I know how it goes. I've been through plenty of training myself. So here's your support team. We'll be here for you. All right. So it's 9:05. We'll go ahead and get started. Get this out of the way. So again, today's course is going to be going over the Realist tax system. Now, the Realist tax system is actually a member benefit that we've had for quite a while. It went through a complete overhaul. I think man, time has been weird since the pandemic started. I want to say it was 2020 that they did this. It might have been, oh no, actually, I know for sure it was 2020. So Flash, which you guys may have remembered as a add-on that your browser had to have running in order for certain websites to work. It was going to be phased out. There was too many security flaws. It wasn't going to be updated anymore. So eventually they got to the point that they just decided to get rid of it altogether. Adobe stopped supporting it, and all of the websites were encouraged to try and move towards the new standard, which is HTML5. None of that really matters that much, but primarily what ended up happening is that Realist, which relied entirely on Flash, got a complete overhaul on the back end, but none of the buttons changed. So maybe just out of curiosity, I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll. I know there's only a couple of you guys, but I just wanted to see how many of you guys have actually used Realist before, and how frequently are you guys looking for tax information in some of the other systems that we have available. While you guys are answering that, just a little bit more background. The interface is the only thing that actually did not change during this big overhaul that they did. So for those of you guys who had been using Realist since it was originally introduced to our MLS, this is the same exact layout that we've had where we have quick search, my search. We've got the map laid out over here to the right, our results down here at the bottom. This is what's called the split view. We're going to be talking a little bit more about this as time goes on, but it looks like, at least of the two of you guys who responded, we've got, oh, somebody's using RPR for their tax info. Yes, I love RPR. But I know that there's no reason to like something that's being presented, but it's just a phenomenal tool. I'm actually always impressed that this is not being used as kind of a gold standard for other apps, but yeah, that's okay. Go ahead and end that. So yeah, one of you is using Realist, the other one's using RPR, but both of you guys have used Realist before. And I'll be honest, I think that Realist is great if you're just looking for tax information and just want to view everything from that perspective. If you need a greater depth of information, you can always go to RPR and it'll provide you probably way more than you'll ever need, but it's available. It's always free to you as a licensed real estate agent through the National Association of Realtors. But Realist, on the other hand, is something that's being presented as a member benefit specifically of our MLS. It's actually something that's tied into our contract with Matrix. So as we're going through and learning some of this information, I did want to remind you guys that you do have access to running the public records search, which is a tax search, just like Realist, through Matrix directly. Now, there's not going to be quite as much customization on this particular page. So you can add in some additional fields like we're going to be doing with Realist later. But if you guys are a little bit more comfortable with Realist than Matrix, or if you guys like Matrix more than Realist, there's effectively the exact same options, exact same functions in either system. But let's start off today with just going through the Realist interface first. So let me zoom this in a little bit. It was zoomed out for some reason. So when you first land on the Realist homepage, so whether you guys are going through the MLS portal, clicking on Realist here, or in Matrix, there's the Realist tax button that'll bring you to the homepage. Either way should bring you to a homepage that has the county that you have selected up here at the top. Then you have a quick search and a my search. Underneath, you can see our attributes that we're going to be searching by, or what other systems might refer to as criteria. So all of the information that we're going to be searching for today is going to end up getting its search results pinned over to either the map or the list, or if you have the split view, you can see both at the same time. Now, when we're running our searches in the quick search, the address field up here at the top is going to allow you to search for anywhere in the state. Now, we have a county that we choose up here at the top, but this address field doesn't care for what county you're entering. So if you guys are jumping in just to grab a tax record, maybe it's in a different county or different state even, you guys can run that search right here. Just put in the address, just as it shows with this little example, 123 Main Street, city, state, zip. You might not even need to get that far into it. So for instance, let's just do a quick search for a very basic address. So when I started typing this in, I just put in the basic street address. I didn't put in the city, the state, the zip code. And already down here at the bottom, I can see that I've found my one match. If I end up hitting search, it'll pull up the record for this particular property. But this will give you effectively a live count the same way that we saw in Matrix. So if you guys are typing out maybe a long address, you don't remember how to spell, like, what was the city that I had to memorize? I think it was Sequoia. Yeah, I think it was Sequoia. I can't even remember how to spell it right now. So if I had to spell that out, I could just be like, all right, let's get the first couple letters in there. But hey, look at that down here in my view results. I've already got one match. Cool. I don't have to continue trying to struggle to spell something. We can just go straight into that search result. And again, regardless of what the address is, Anywhere in the state should be covered. But if we do end up wanting to run an owner name search or a tax ID search, both of those are going to be dependent on what county we have chosen. Now, the same thing is going to go whenever we get to the My Search section, but we'll cover that in just a bit here. So up here at the top, let's talk about this county option. So if you do end up just having one county that you're working in, cool, that's easy. You set it once, never have to worry about it again. But let's say that you guys do end up in a situation where you're needing to search outside your normal county usage. We're going to click on this Change County option, and then it just presents us with all 77 counties here in Oklahoma, as well as the 7 neighboring counties that we have over in Arkansas. So you might see a couple of those. An important example of that is going to be down here at the bottom. We've got a Washington County here in Oklahoma. This is where Bartlesville is. Almost said Nowata. And then Washington in Arkansas is just across the border. But just remember when you guys are going to this list, if you're wanting to make sure that you get Washington County in Oklahoma for Bartlesville listings and so on, make sure that you're seeing that okay. If you guys want to simplify that process, there is actually a button over here to the left that makes sure that you're seeing, okay, this is the Washington in Arkansas. And if I switch over to Oklahoma, this is the Washington in Oklahoma. Now, when you check the check boxes, that's going to add it to this list over here to the right. Now, this particular interface that we're seeing where we've got categories over on the left, we've got checkboxes here in the middle, and then anything that we've selected over here on the right, this is going to appear in a bunch of different places in Realist. So just keep that in mind whenever we're going through. Some of these other systems are going to be using the exact same layout. But over here on the right-hand side, after I've chosen any of the counties that I'm wanting to search by, I can see what's called a recording date. Now, it looks like most of these actually got, that's an interesting trend. Oh my goodness. Did we get a bunch of fresh data on the 6th and 7th, it looks like? I don't think I've ever seen that many that are, oh, there's Sequoia, by the way. I don't think I've seen that many that are the same date. Anyway, this recording date is letting us know when it was that we last received fresh information from the county. Now, it used to be that this information was a little bit delayed in some counties, like it might be a couple weeks out. And then other counties, it could be that it was, oh man, I think the oldest I ever saw one was like 6 months old. Now, the county assessor's offices, in case you guys haven't heard about this hullabaloo, but they have all started moving towards the same system, meaning that everybody in the state will be using the same tax record interface. So all using the same database, entering their information the same way. This is going to provide a lot more continuity and a lot more relevance to the data because everybody's going to have to be using the same system, which means that more likely than not, other than a county not having any activity at all and nothing to report, you guys should see consistency like this again in the future. Now, being within a day of each other is new to me, so I'm not sure if you can expect that, but that should allow you guys to at least see when it was that that information was last gathered. Now, one of the real important things to keep in mind with this recording date is that if you are looking for something that happened on the 10th, for instance, that information will not be appearing on the tax record because that was not part of the recording information that was provided on the 7th. So if you do find yourself looking for something and you're not sure when it was that sale had occurred or whether or not it had actually been reported to the tax office yet, you can always check that recording date to make sure and then ask the client or whoever it is you're talking to when it was that they suspect it was completed. But whenever we click on apply, we can always check on the recording date up at the top left. It'll show your county. There it goes. It'll show your county up here at the top left. If you guys remember from earlier, it actually just said Tulsa. If I hold my cursor over this, whether there's one county or multiple, it's going to show me all of the counties that I have selected and what the recording date was for that. So even without having to go into this change county option, if I did need to just quickly find out whether or not Tulsa had reported recently, I can hold my cursor over this, check the recording date, and know that, all right, well, it looks like that was completed on the 14th. So, there's no chance that that actually has already been added into Realist. And again, whenever you guys choose that county, it's going to work for the owner name and the tax ID, whereas the address and of course the MLS number, because it doesn't care where you're finding this listing, either of those are going to be just completely open-ended. So if you search for something in Durant when you've got counties up here in the north selected, it won't care. If you choose a listing that's out in the panhandle, but you're still, searching normally with the counties over here, it's not going to care. But the owner name and the tax ID will be dependent on this county. Now, the limitations that we have on the quick search section here are pretty obvious. I mean, we've got a county, or excuse me, we've got the address search up at the top. We've got an owner name where we can add in, Smith, maybe add in another name if we wanted to search for Johnson as well. And that'll search within this particular county. But if we wanted to search for a greater variety of criteria or attributes, we're going to have to switch over to this My Search section. Now, the My Search section works the same way that the owner and tax ID do, where it's going to be searching only within these counties. Now, you may have noticed when I was on that change county page that it does have a limit to how many counties I can choose at a time. So if I end up hitting that limit of 8 counties, it's going to be searching for, tens of thousands, potentially even hundreds of thousands of properties. So just keep that in mind whenever you guys are running your search, that you may want to limit it to just a couple of counties at a time. Otherwise, if you're running a search on this My Search, for instance, and you put in an owner name like Smith, it's going to be thousands and thousands and thousands of results. Like even if I just do it with these 2 counties that I have right now, I've got 2,662, and that's just between Washington and Tulsa County. If we start doing 8 whole counties, you're going to find a huge amount of results. So it might not be worthwhile to have your counties be a really large selection. Might be good to just focus in on the ones that you're using the most. But once you get into this My Search section, there's a saved search up at the top. Just for today's class, and you guys can always adjust this later, and we'll talk about the saved searches that you guys can make for yourself later. But for now, I'm just going to use this general query option. Let's see, there we go. The general query is actually a system default. You notice this little golden padlock on that, and the foreclosure query. Of course, how long, depending on how long you guys have been around, you may also even see this My Search default. But the general query and foreclosure query should be there by default, with that little golden padlock indicating that this is something that the system has defined and that you can't make any changes to it, but it'll be the same no matter, if you change offices or if you end up changing your interface, you're never going to have to worry about missing that system default. But on the general query, it starts us off with our owner name option. Now the owner name selection here actually gives us a couple different choices for it. We can search by last name, first name, or if there's a organization or corporation that's in charge of a particular property, we can search by that name as well. We do have a little selection over here to the right that allows us to narrow our search even further. So if you have the exact spelling, the exact order that the names are going to appear, so like in this case, it's saying last, first, or corporate name. If you're searching in Tulsa County, for instance, it's going to have to be last name, first name, and then initial. So if you wanted to take your chances with that, you can always switch this over to an is option to ensure that we're only finding people where the information that you typed in here is an exact match. Now, as we'll see a little bit later when we're pulling up some of the tax records, that might not be the most efficient way to search. You might want to leave it on the system default, which is starts with. Now, the starts with option is going to ensure that if we have somebody that has an unusual name, we can search for them and it'll only find people that have this at the beginning. So if you do, again, have a county where the last name appears first, it's going to try and make sure that this is going to be who you're tracking down. Now, let's say we want to expand our search a little bit further. This is the include option, where instead of it just searching for any names that start with that, it's going to be searching for any of the properties that include Zollner on there. So not always necessarily the best. I mean, notice this dramatically increased our search results. If I do starts with, which is again the default, that's going to be the best option. Now, there is this little plus option. This takes whatever information you guys have already entered and then allows you to add more to the search. So for instance, if I wanted to do, what's another name that's not going to find a lot of results? Wow, I can't think of another unique name. Anyway, we'll just do Smith. And you notice that what ends up happening is that it actually is combining the results for Smith with the results for Zollner. So both of those should appear in our matches. This might not always necessarily be the best option, but it is an interesting choice if you guys do have maybe multiple different spellings that you might need to search for, or um, the practical use for the owner name option isn't really that great. Instead, let's actually look at this house number option. Now the house number gives us the exact same choice where we can put in a number, just a flat number. Notice it has is as the primary option, but we can also choose is between, is greater than, or is less than. Now the is between gives us a range where we do 1500 to 1600. And then we can also click the plus button and then add a different range in as well. Now, either way that you guys do that, it's still going to be dependent on the county that you guys are choosing here. So just keep in mind that if you guys are putting in a range or something like that that's outside of the county, you might not be able to track anything down. Welcome, Janet. I also wanted to mention as well, this is greater than may have some unintended consequences. So for instance, if I do 1500 and then let's say Peoria, what this is actually going to be tracking down is both North and South Peoria. So for instance, if I end up running this search, it's going to have this little gap in the middle of the city. Zoom in here real quick. So you can see that 1500 plus is going to run all the way north, but then there's also this gap here where it's 1400 to 1400, the split being North Peoria and South Peoria. So when you guys first get into the default search, you may notice that there's some obvious things that you might want to search by in the future that are missing. We'll cover how to do that when we get to this customized search option. But just remember to try and keep your search functions a little bit more constrained, just to ensure that you guys are finding relevant results. So like if I switch this to 15 to 1600, I see only a couple collections. And then after we go to customize search, we can add in a pre-directional or post-directional so that we only find the results in that certain part of the city that we're interested in. Now, I'm going to clear all of my results and clear all my search criteria. We've got the street name section here. Now, this is going to look a little different than how we have it in Matrix. In Matrix, we have a relatively tight list of all of the street names that you can use. That's all stuff that has to be pre-entered by us on the MLS side of things. But this street name option is going to be checking for the spelling. So make sure that if you are searching for a particular property and you need to make sure that you're finding just that property, that you have the street name spelled correctly. You do have a starts with option so that, you know, again, if you have that Sequoia situation where you're not entirely sure how that's supposed to be spelled, you can just type in the beginning of it and then see in the results what the correct spelling is. Now this street suffix section, this is fairly simple. I'm going to be just hitting a bunch of keys, just hopefully you guys can actually hear this, but there's only 4 spaces for us to be able to put in. Now, that means that what we're looking for is the abbreviations. So instead of doing the full word boulevard, which again, another word that's difficult to spell, we just put in BLVD and you're good to go. Avenue, street, circle. Anyway, we've got our subdivision list as well. Now the subdivision list is actually going to function the same way that Matrix does. So with the street name, it's just kind of open-ended. It allows you guys to put in anything. With the subdivision, you click on this select from list option. Oh, actually, since I changed my county, I have to refresh the web page. There we go. Okay, now we got the subdivision search. So when you get into the subdivision search, if I type in, let's say, Minchell Park, for instance, I can see all of the Minchell Parks that pop up. Now, the search function is kind of given way to our, if you guys remember when we were looking at the counties, we had all Oklahoma and Arkansas. In this one, we do our search, then we're presented with the list of all of our subdivisions that might match. There we go. And then over here on the right, we see the list as it stands with all the checkboxes on it. We can get rid of those if we need to, and we clear the selection if we just want to get rid of all of them at the same time. But if I choose one of them and hit search, it'll put all of my pins on the map, and I can see all of those listings, or all of those properties, excuse me, in the first Minchell Park subdivision. If we do end up wanting to get rid of anything that's on the screen, just like I did earlier, we hit clear all, gets rid of all of our search criteria, as well as all the search results that had filled the screen. There are a couple extra options down here at the bottom that people very rarely use. Now, if you guys are working with any vacant land or properties that don't necessarily have a fresh 911 address, you may end up needing to search by township range and section. But very often people just don't end up using these at all. So let's actually transition over here to doing the customized search choice. Now on customized search, when we first land on this page, if we're using that general query, it's actually got everything locked. So notice we can't change the name. We can choose between any of our other searches that we have saved. But over here on the right-hand side, I can't make any changes to this. I can't uncheck any checkboxes. But if we add a checkbox to this, so for instance, let's say that I wanted to find out if this is an owner-occupied space. Maybe that's something I needed to search. There's a little checkbox here for owner-occupied, and as soon as I check it, notice it changes how the screen is laid out. We no longer have the system default, that general query up here. We can type in a search name. And over here on the right, all of our selected attributes are now open. This means that I can come down here to the bottom and get rid of township range section. I can even grab this owner occupied and actually move this up a little further. Let's also add in our pre-directional. So I'm going to go to the geography category. This simplifies my list so that I'm not seeing a massive list of a ton of stuff that I'm not going to use. I'm going to just use this pre-direction. There we go. And I want to put this in a little bit more logical order. So I'm going to move this up to before the street name. Then I'm going to click on post direction and do the same thing with that after the street suffix. There we go. Now, if I wanted to save this for future usage, I need to make sure that I put in a name up here at the top. So I'll just say, there we go. Down here at the very bottom, we have the save option. It's going to take the order and all of the options that I have chosen over here. And it's also going to save this class, or the search name up here at the top. When I hit save, that means that it'll now appear in that list so that whenever I'm looking at the general query, there's also going to be my most recently saved search. Now, if we don't end up wanting to save this particular setup that we have for future usage, what you can do is actually just check the checkboxes, add the things in that you want, and then over here on the side, instead of doing the save option, when we hit apply, it's going to take all of those options that I've added in there, allow me to do my search for it right now, but then whenever I get back into Realist, I'm going to have to either save that for future use, or if I switch to a different saved search, that search layout that I had will just go away forever unless you save it. But down here at the bottom, all of the things that I added, so I've got my foreclosure indicator, distressed sales, blah, 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 blah. All of this is just being added temporarily. So if you guys needed to customize a search for just this moment, not something that you guys are going to be using in the future, just go to customize search, check your checkboxes, hit apply. If you want to keep it for future use, you check your checkboxes, arrange your order, give it a name, and then hit save. In my case, I'm going to just leave this with the options that I have. Let's run that same search that we just did earlier, where I did a house number is between. We'll do 1500 to 1600. I'm going to do pre-directional south, and then we'll add in Peoria this time. Now it's actually going to be searching in a much more narrow range. It's just going to find these properties that are within that range on Peoria on the south side. So we're not looking for any of the properties in the north. If I switch this, makes it a lot easier. So keep that in mind if you guys do end up in a situation where it's not giving you all the criteria that you might want to search by. You can just go up to this customized search, add the options, and either apply them or save them for future usage. All right, so now let's talk about how these search results are popping up. Whenever we've been running searches so far, we've been seeing the number of matches. I've completed a couple searches where it puts a ton of pins on my map and fills up my search results down here at the bottom. But there's 3 different ways that the search results will appear on the screen. So whenever we search for something that just provides us a ton of results. So for instance, when we were looking for, let's expand our search a little bit, 2100 to 3100. North, Vancouver, let's try that. Oh, let's just do Peoria again, I guess. I thought Vancouver went a little further, but that's okay. Wait, what? I don't think I've ever seen an out-of-state result before like that. That's interesting. Well, I'm going to cover the map tools a little bit later, but this is a little unusual. I apologize. Normally I'm not having this much difficulty with the, I mean, these are searches that we've run before. Okay. All right, let's try that search again. I'm gonna have to report that because I've literally never seen a, like Arkansas results, sure, but never something that far north. All right, so I've got my search results that popped up. So what it did is it dropped a bunch of pins on my map, and then we've got our search results down here at the bottom. Now, we can jump into individual listings or individual properties just by clicking on the number, and then it'll actually highlight that up here on my map. If I click on the report button, this report button is actually going to pull up the information for this particular property and only that property. If we actually want to see all of the results, there is actually a button down here at the bottom. It's just reports. When you click on reports, it'll show the list of all of your properties that you have in your search results. So we can click in between those and find out more about them, see what they're about, and then move on to a different listing. There's an arrow back and forth up here. But when we click back, brings us back to our map, back to our search results. And again, we can just click on one of these individually and then hit report. You notice that this does not pop up with the, oh, they changed the behavior on that finally. Oh, they did. Okay. When you click on them, it's going to pull up the list still. I think they actually just changed that because that wasn't even the same in the last class. There's been some changes that they've done, and I guess they didn't notify us. That's okay, though. Nothing too major, at least so far. But whenever we end up seeing a list like this, you can get into the reports individually without any issue. But let's say that we go through and we're actually searching for a specific property. So for instance, I'm going to put in that same address that we looked at earlier. When it pops up with only one match, as soon as you hit that search function, it's not going to bother putting a pin on a map and putting the result down here when it's just one item. When you hit search, it just jumps directly into the search result, and you can see the listing information, property details, whatever the case may be for that property. So it's not going to try and, sidetrack you with getting into the search result. It's just going to dive directly into the report, assuming that whenever you're searching for one property, this is the information you were seeking. Now, it's important to note as well that when you guys are running these searches, if you hit back after you guys have seen the result report, you can still see the location of it. You can still see the search result, so that if you needed to search around in the area, you can. So for instance, if I was working with this person's neighbor and I just happened to remember their address, but forgot what the exact address was of the property that I was working with, I can run my search, go back to the map, and then click on that property next door and hit the report for that one instead. But we'll talk a little bit more about the map search in a moment here. So let's actually pull up our property in question today. So 5125, and in this case, it's going to be South Sandusky. So I'm not even going to bother putting in the full street name. That already found my one match, even just with the information I put in. So when I hit search, again, with just one result pulling up, it just goes directly into the search results report. Now up here at the top, we see our full address that goes all the way to the county information. This also shows us our bedroom count, bathroom count, any of the sales price. It's going to try and show you the most recent information. So what we're seeing here is that a lot of these actually have a prefix that says MLS. So the most recent information that we gathered was actually coming from the MLS sales price and the MLS sales date. If the most recent information was some kind of for sale by owner, or if there was some other, tax record information that was being put in, it's going to show that sales price without this MLS information. It just happens to be in this particular property's case that the most recent sale was actually recorded on the MLS side of things. We're going to see this little MLS prefix on a couple other pieces of information a little further down. But if the system doesn't have the data available to it for whatever reason through the tax record information, so like in this case, Tulsa County, for, again, whatever dumb reason, doesn't keep track of the bedroom count, the MLS has that information. And so Realist will grab that from there and prefer that information over just leaving a blank. So we'll see that a little bit later. The next section down is going to show us our owner information. One important note about how Realist processes information is that when it sees the owner and the tax billing address, it's going to assume that if the tax billing address matches the address of the property itself, it assumes that this owner actually lives there. That's as complicated as it gets for trying to track down the owner occupied status. So it's not giving you, some self-reported information or something that the Census Bureau tracked down or whatever. It's literally just verifying this person lives at this address, which matches this property address, which means that it's an owner-occupied residence. So try not to worry too much about that or overthink it. We've had some questions about that in the past, but I just wanted to clarify that. Otherwise, this section's pretty basic. Location information is going to have your school district. This is the unified school district name. It's not going to necessarily show you which exact schools that the children would be going to. We have our subdivision name as well. If you guys do have a property that you guys are entering into the MLS, if that does not have its subdivision added into the system quite yet, and you're searching for it, you can't seem to track it down, and you see it right here on the tax record, but it's not showing up, get in contact with us at the service desk and we'll add it for you. And in fact, whenever we're adding the subdivisions so that they autofill on Matrix, we're typically going to be putting in the subdivision name, as well as providing the township range and section, the county, the school district, so that all of that information comes together whenever you guys are putting in the subdivision, because this is always going to be the same on the subdivisions. This is always going to be the same on all the subdivision. So like none of these pieces of information should be too radically disconnected. And if they are, they just won't show up. So like we did have one, actually the most useful example. If you guys don't have a subdivision on a property, like if it's just in an unplatted area, we do have a subdivision that's just called Tulsa Co. Unplatted. And that way you guys don't have to oblige a subdivision if there just isn't one. Anyway, we do get people calling in occasionally, thankfully not too often, but occasionally asking what the subdivision is for their property, or they call in and they're worried about, well, it's asking for township range and section, but they don't have a township range and section. I guarantee every single property in the entire state has a township range and section. So all of that should be able to be found in here. There are occasions where this isn't going to show up. I have seen that on a couple of properties in the past, but the vast majority, especially depending on what county you guys are working in, the vast majority of them should have that already pre-built into the tax records here. Next section down, we've got our tax parcel information. It shows just some basics about it. The only real important piece of information from here is actually this tax parcel number. This is something that you guys can use whenever you're adding in the details into Matrix, or if you guys are actually starting up a transaction for this particular property, you can use that tax parcel number to search for the information when you add it into Transaction Desk. We don't cover that in our class today. We do mention it in the Transaction Desk class, but this is the number that you guys will need to search for. Now, next we've got our tax assessment information. This goes back a couple years. So like we've already got the 2021 information put in, even though that was, just a couple months ago. But it goes back a couple years here. It shows the same thing down here at the bottom. One of the things that I really appreciate about how they display this is that it actually shows what it was a couple years ago, what it was last year with the dollar change as well as a percentage change. And then also it shows this year with the dollar change, percentage change, so that you can see if there's any trends. Bear in mind as well, this is actually doing it on a year-by-year basis. So this is $42 up from last year, or 1.39% up from last year. So it's not actually tracking it from the previous. So it just goes year by year. Anyway, characteristics, this is where we're going to start getting into some of the more complicated stuff. The rest of that stuff's pretty basic. But the characteristics is only going to show us information that's actually been filled out on this tax record. In a moment, we're going to see what I mean by that, but just bear in mind that if there is a blank on the tax record information, the Realist system by default will actually not show that field at all. So if there was, like, let's say under this location information, a historical preservation district that this was in, or a historical preservation code, that information will show up here. If we don't have that information because it's not applicable to this property, it just will be empty and you won't even see it. On the characteristics, some of these empty spaces have actually been filled in specifically by MLS data. So for instance, the garage capacity, we've got 2-car garage. This information came over directly from the MLS. The same thing goes over here on our bedroom count. The bedroom count was actually provided by the MLS because Tulsa County doesn't keep track of their bedroom count. So if you do have a property that you guys are working with, you come across a situation where you're needing to track down a very specific piece of information. If you check the county records here in Realist and it doesn't show that data, there's either a chance that the county isn't keeping track of it, like in Tulsa and the bedrooms, but there's also the opportunity up here at the top under Customize View to switch over to a fixed view. Now, just like I was saying with like the historical preservation code being added only whenever there's actually details, it's because this is set to the dynamic option. This means that only the attributes that actually have values will be shown. If I switch this over to the fixed view, this is going to allow me to see all of the parts and pieces of all of the data, whether there's something in that information or not. So again, under location information, historical preservation zoning code is just empty. District, empty. If I go down here to our characteristics, you'll notice that there's a lot of characteristics that are just empty on here. So when we were looking at it from the dynamic view, this information was just gone, so that it wasn't cluttering up our screen. If we tried to print this, which we'll talk about in a bit here, it's going to actually leave all of those blanks on there, which means that whenever I'm printing the report, my report is going to be huge. Definitely not an ideal. But if you do end up in those situations where you're trying to track down a specific piece of information, you pulled up the property, you can't seem to find it on this list here, switch over to that fixed view, and you might actually track down, oh, it looks like it's just not recorded. So it's not something that was omitted intentionally, it's just something that's not being kept track of by the county. So if I go back up to customize view, I can switch back over to dynamic, and that'll simplify my information back down so that the only things that I'm seeing are the fields that actually have data in them. Now, if you do find that there's a discrepancy between what's in the MLS versus what's actually shown in the tax record, it'll show both. And in fact, actually, if you hold your cursor over, for instance, full baths or total baths, you can see this little pop-up that's showing up above my cursor here. It says tax 3, MLS 3. If there is ever a discrepancy, it's going to show the same way that we see that tax 3, MLS 3, except it'll show the discrepancy. So if there was total number of baths was 4, and the MLS but 3 on the tax record, and there was actually a half bath that wasn't recorded, it's going to show a section per half bath with MLS 1, and then total bath will be different, MLS total bath will be different, and the full baths will be the same. So there will still be that continuity here. So a lot of different ways that this information will appear. This just happens to be a good example. Next section down is our cell score indicator. This is a interesting section. It's a cool field to kind of keep track of, what the market is like in that particular area. I might as well mention that this is actually a section that you can kind of take with a grain of salt or just ignore completely. But the cell score indicator is trying to be effectively a real estate Nostradamus. It's trying to verify whether or not this particular property is in a market that's actually extremely desirable, or if this particular property itself is desirable amongst the other properties in its market. Now, the algorithm is relatively complex, but notice down here, it's trying to clarify what this actually is. It's a little bit small even while I'm zoomed in, but it says the cell score indicates the relative likelihood a property will be listed for sale in the next 6 months. Again, real estate Nostradamus. It's trying to predict whether or not this particular property will be sold. Just as a funny side note, the realist tax information, because we use this property as an example every single class. When this was, I think, being shown off in whatever, it was late 2020. Real estate market was going nuts. Early 2021, same thing. The cell score indicator for this was actually, I think, 803 or something like that. Like it was some absurd number on the upper end of this high choice. Now, we're going to get down here to the listing information. The last time this particular property was listed was back in 2013. So clearly, whenever it was trying to predict that this particular property was likely to sell, it didn't. So again, just keep this all as a, kind of litmus test for whether or not it's going to be sold. But I mean, the only time I'm usually seeing a particular property as an agent is if I'm tracking down something for a seller or trying to do some research on something. So the likelihood that this is going to be selling soon is pretty high. So you can always just kind of ignore that if you'd like. And actually, when we talk about the customized view, we can remove that. But first, let's look at the other one that I'm going to recommend removing, which is the estimated value. Now, the estimated value is a branded AVM. Now, for those of you guys who mentioned that you have used RPR in the past, this is kind of going to be like the AVM and RVM that you have in RPR, where it's a branded version of an AVM. So an AVM is actually just a general term. So you can have the Zestimate on Zillow is technically speaking an AVM. Now, each company will have their own proprietary version of this. That's why this is the Real AVM TM. This trademarked version is an algorithm that not only includes the tax record information, which is the baseline for what an AVM is supposed to do, but it's also going to be including some additional options like the listing data. So this confidence that it has in this particular number is actually relatively well founded, depending on how much data it has available to it. But what this is indicating is just what the value should be, and it even provides us a range. Now, sometimes you guys don't want to show this to the client because it might be way off base, or it might just be uh, radically different because the market has been slow or hot, or this particular property is unique, but it's not being represented properly. But over here to the right, we've got a confidence score that you guys should take into consideration. So if you do end up seeing a number here and it's like spot on to what it was that you guys were expecting this property to sell for, but the confidence score is low or high or whatever, it won't necessarily matter. Let's say that you guys are completely unfamiliar with the property. You get in here, you're looking at the attributes under the characteristics and seeing some things that you think, probably 250 or higher. Then you get down here to the real AVM, showing a number that's higher than you expected, but no, that 250 is actually still technically within this range. Just keep track of this confidence score as time goes on with this particular property or just any property you're looking at. The higher this confidence score is, the more likely that this number is accurate. And it's also going to narrow down this range as well. Another thing is that the higher this confidence score is, the lower the standard deviation will be, which again is contributing to a narrower range. But all that to say, if you guys do end up having somebody that maybe doesn't need to see an estimated value, or you're trying to print off a report for a client that you guys have already set a price estimate on, this estimated value could muddy the waters on that. So we may want to remove that. Now up here at the top under the customized view, it was the sell score indicator and the estimated value that I want to get rid of. So I'm going to go in here. And again, just like we saw on the county and also when we were looking at the customized search or searching for the subdivisions, we've got a bunch of checkboxes over here on the left and all of our selected items over on the right. So I'm going to get rid of the estimated value by unchecking it, or I could just click on it on the list over here. And the sell score was the propensity sell score. It keeps it all in the same order that you guys have over here on the right. So even if you don't know what the name is exactly, you can keep track of it over here on the right. Be like it was under this characteristics. Oh, propensity sell score. All right, hit the X or uncheck the checkbox, and that'll save that information. So now when I click apply, go back to my list, I can see I've got owner still, location, tax information, assessment, characteristics. Now, oh, wait a second. No more sell score, no more estimated value. So already simplified my list a little bit. I've left it on my dynamic view, so my report should actually now just get substantially shorter. Now the next section down is the listing information. I'll keep this one short since we're getting towards the top of the hour and I want to give you guys a break, but the listing information is just going to show the most recent listing up here at the top, and then it'll show the previous listings in chronological order. So most recent, next most recent, next most recent, and so on going into the past. If we click on this button right here, where the listing number shows kind of a link, this is actually going to open up Matrix and show all of the listings that match that particular address. It's going to try and make sure that all of those are connected to the same tax record. But there is a very good likelihood if you guys are searching for something that this particular property might end up having, maybe there's a South Sandusky Avenue, and then there's a South Sandusky Court or something like that. It'll try to, get rid of any of those spares. We did have an example where there was a property that was just normal South 151st Street, I think. And then there was South 151st Street North, which was actually a vacant land immediately north of the property. And whenever you ran that search by just clicking on this button here, it actually found all of them, including the vacant land. So there is always the chance that, those outliers may exist, but the vast majority of the time, If you click on this listing number, it's just going to immediately jump you into a history search in Matrix, so you can find out more about each individual listing. Now, the next section down is our last market sale and sales history. As you guys can see, this is pretty close to the end, not to worry. In this case, we're actually seeing we've got the tax record shows that it had the information updated about the sale on the 29th. Looks like the agent dragged her feet. Big surprise. It's uh, on putting the information put in to Matrix. So it actually shows that the MLS closing date was actually a little bit later. That's actually part of the reason why up here at the top, it's preferring the MLS sales price and the MLS sales date, was because it wasn't that there was a big discrepancy between what the sales price was, but it does show us that the tax record had it recorded on one date, and the MLS had it recorded on another date. Now we do have the owner name here, which matches the owner name right here. And we can see that just like we had with the listing information where it goes back and back and back, the tax information is going to do the exact same thing. Now you'll notice this sales price section doesn't always have a sales price connected to it, even though the information about this particular property actually did change hands. So for instance, we see here we've got on the buyer name, Espo Construction ended up selling it to Charles and Eileen Cannon in 2004. And then 4 months later, they ended up doing the nominal change. So this actually went from Charles and Eileen Cannon to the Eileen Cannon Trust. So no money changed hands. They just needed to update who it was that owned the property. Similarly, a little bit later, Tara Brother ended up buying it from the Eileen Cannon Living Trust. And then she ended up apparently getting married to Robert Cope, and Robert Cope and her ended up putting it under both of their names. Again, just a nominal change, no money changed hands. And then finally, the Copes ended up selling it to Michael Taylor. Here's the value, here's the dates. So keeps it all kind of in line with each other. And you can move further back. There's a scroll button or scroll bar down at the bottom, or you guys can use these arrows to kind of incrementally move back, depending on how much data there is in the system. Now, finally, we get down to our mortgage history. This is always fun to look at if you guys are looking at anybody but your own. Then, of course, it's that stinging pain of, yeah, look at how much money I owe. But down at the very, very bottom, after all of the other data that we have in the system, it's going to provide you guys a effectively just a lot dimensions. This shows the actual parcel lines on here. It does give estimates for each of these, but again, just like a lot of the other generalized information, take these with a grain of salt. It might be 170 feet and 5 inches, or this section here that's actually a curved portion. They actually just put it into segments, broke that down into an 18-foot, 21-foot, 21-foot, 19-foot. This might not be the exact number of the property's line there. That might actually be give or take a foot or so, depending on how many links in that curve there are. And then over here to the right, we have a contextual map. This shows us effectively just where this particular property is located in the context of the neighborhood that it's in. Now, if I want to see more about this map, I can always click this back button up here at the top. And this brings me back to where I've got the dot on the map, the search result here. And we're going to go ahead and just take our break here before we jump into the other sections. So I'm going to set up the video back on the screen. And we're going to take a 10-minute break starting at 10:01. So I'll see you guys back here at 10:11. So if you guys do have any questions in the interim, though, I'll be keeping track of the chat, but we'll go ahead and take our break, and I will see you guys back. If you hear the music stop, that means we're going to be getting started again. Hey, there we go. All right. Let's go ahead and get started again. So where we left off, we had searched for a specific property, and we were just gone through the first section of the report. So in case you guys didn't notice this up at the top of the screen, we've actually only been perusing the property details section. So that's all the stuff that we had just been looking at. We can customize this view specifically and make sure to add or remove any of the things that we want from the report. And we gathered some information from here, including how the MLS shows information, as well as how to get into previous listing information and checking old tax records. So seeing when it had changed hands, for how much, or if it was nominal changes. Now let's move on to the comparables section. Now the comparables section is fairly simple. This is going to be an automated comparables search. What this is doing is it's going to be trying to find any of the properties in the immediate vicinity that are similar to the property in question. Now, this is going to be using just kind of some basic attributes of the property. So you may end up finding that this particular screen isn't going to show you everything that you might want, or it might show you information that, isn't as relevant as one might hope. Now, all of that can be clarified up here at the top right, where we've got our search criteria, and we've even got a customized view option for this screen as well. So when I go to the search criteria option, it starts me off with finding how many comparables I would like. We can go all the way up to 50, which would be pretty surprising if we could track down that many. We also have a sort method where it can show any of the variety of different options for that. The distance from subject is honestly the best option. That's usually what I recommend. And in fact, a lot of these defaults that they have up here at the top, at least, are going to be kind of the best practice anyway. So you might not want to mess with any of these. What we might need to change, though, is going to be down here where it starts with the distance from subject, bedroom count, bathroom count, maybe, but distance from subject is going to define how far away we're going to be searching when we're looking for comparables. So I'm going to actually expand this out to a mile. A little further down, I'm going to choose to search for the time frame back only 6 months. If you guys have been through our CMAs and matrix class, you may start recognizing some of these options. This is going to be the same criteria that we recommend you guys use whenever you're going through doing CMA searches in matrix. So having it within a mile, that's typically something that's recommended by lenders. Having it only go 6 months back, that's something that we recommend, as well as the National Association of Realtors. But this is all going to be dependent on where you're searching as well. So if you do have an area that's maybe not getting a lot of activity, or there's not too many properties changing hands in the spot that your property that you're working with is located, this search time period can be expanded up to a year. It does have a hard cap at a year, which is typically the hard cap for every system. I know RPR allows you guys to search for something beyond that, but that's including areas in Alaska, since it covers the entire uh, country. So 12 months is as far back as you might want to go. This whole pandemic has just been kind of wild for the real estate market. So I can't stress this enough. Make sure that you guys limit the time frame, because the market has been going up and down and just been going a little bit wild. So try not to find results that are a little bit too far back, because that is pretty likely to guarantee that you're going to be getting irrelevant results. You might be finding something from, halfway through last year when the market was a little bit slowing down after the boom that happened in 2020. So just keep this constrained if possible. Uh, the living area and lot area are going to have a percentage difference. I typically recommend leaving these on the default that they have at 15, but let's say that you guys get lucky and you're finding a lot of results. You might want to restrict yourself so that you're only seeing things that are a little bit more closely related to the property in question. Then finally, we get land use and style. Land use, leave that on the same as subject. Style, don't bother with this unless you guys know exactly which style it is. But I'll be honest, we have a lot of properties in the system that are being marked with styles that are not accurate. We used to offer a class on that was hosted by a very, 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 wait, yeah. We used to have a class on this that was hosted by somebody who was very, very knowledgeable on the styles. Uh, we don't anymore, just because at the beginning of the pandemic, she just stopped teaching in person. It hasn't started back up again. But we do have some things like the modern style. A lot of people will end up marking something as modern, even though the modern style is actually its own codified style. It's not just mentioning, well, this was made in the last like 10 years. That must be quote unquote modern. No, there's actually a specific styles, just like dance has modern dance. That's something that was codified back in the 50s. There's styles are not something that's really uh, as well known, I think, as it should be. But if you end up marking a style, there's a very good likelihood that you'll artificially limit your results and you won't end up finding what you need. But after I've made my adjustments to all of this, there's two different options down here at the bottom. We can either save and submit, which means that all of these preferences that I just set will actually become my system defaults. But if I'm only going to change these defaults just for this particular property, and I don't want to accidentally overwrite my defaults that I'm normally using, I can just use this submit option, which means that it takes what I've changed here and only does it for this particular property. This way, if I jump into another property later on down the line, it'll still have that half mile and the 15%. So if I hit submit, we're good to go. I'm going to see a lot more results pop up because it's expanded my search out. Oh, actually got the exact, that's an interesting coincidence. Got the exact same results because I did the 10%. Let me switch this back up to 15%. There we go. Now I should see a bunch of results. Even that extra 5%, yeah, tripled it. So now that we've got our search results put in, if we do find that some of these results are actually not of interest or maybe aren't particularly that similar, down here on the bottom half of the screen, we see all of our search results and we can check or uncheck any of the options that are maybe a little too dissimilar. So let's say that I wanted to get rid of all of these properties that are north of 51st Street. So I'd have to get rid of number 8, 4, 3, and 2. So I uncheck those checkboxes. I need to get rid of number 5. Oh, here we go. So now I'm only seeing the things from south. It looks like number 4 is north. There we go. So you can check all of these checkboxes, or you can uncheck the ones that are not similar. It is going to show when we click on generate report what the search criteria was. So just bear in mind that if the client goes through and tries to track down the comparables the same way that you have, there's a very good likelihood that if they use the same exact search criteria, which is actually part of the report, will be printed off whenever we send this to a client. If they do a search by the same metrics and find more results, there's a chance that they might underestimate the value of you as a realtor because you ended up going through with your expertise and figured out whether or not these particular elements were accurate or not. So maybe just keep that in mind if you do end up artificially restricting your results by unchecking checkboxes. The client might go through and do their own research and think that you're not finding everything that they need. But a little further down, once we've generated the report, it shows our map. It's now a little bit larger on the screen. It shows our search results, or search criteria, excuse me, and then our summary statistics showing the subject property, the high, low, median, and average of the comparable properties that we found. And then a little further down, it shows the subject property. And then as we scroll to the right here, it shows all of our comparable properties that it found. So that way we can do an exact direct comparison between, all right, this is the square footage for this particular property, this is the bedroom count for that property, so on and so forth. So comparables tab, it's available if you guys want it, but as you guys can tell, this isn't something that you may end up needing to use too often. Again, we have the CMAs and matrix class, and then we also have an additional class on RPR, and RPR has its own comparable search as well. Any of those should be able to produce the same level of detail It's just going to be dependent on how you guys would like to search for things and display the results. Now, the next tab over is the market trends. I'm going to barely spend any time on this one. Just this is more for your edification. If you guys need to kind of find out what this particular area is like, you notice this is narrowing it down to the zip code. The only thing that's really of any value on here, besides, if you guys have some extra usage cases for some of the other options, you can check those out. But the median sales price tax versus median sales price MLS is a really important section. This is a good spot to show if you have a client that maybe isn't interested in working with a realtor, or maybe they have some doubts about your value. This median sales price tax is actually showing all of the records in that area. So the zip code, the county, and or city, zip code, city, and county, excuse me. And it's showing that broken down so that we can see what the median sales price was for all of the properties that moved, all based on tax records. The next section down is the median sales price for just the properties that passed through the MLS. So bear in mind again that this means that these properties may or may not have been represented by a realtor, whereas all of these properties were represented by a realtor. There is one big catch between these two, because obviously we want to show that, oh, hey, look, we've got the median sales price in October of 2021 was 210 for the zip code, according to the tax records. If I go down here to the median sales price in the MLS, the most recent month is actually January, because it's already finished January statistics. So it's actually showing at the very end January rather than October. So when we're looking through this information, we can see, oh, it looks like in October for the MLS specifically, it was 248. That means that there was $38,000 more median, at least, than what the tax records show. So there's a very good likelihood this is a tool that you guys can use to indicate to clients that are maybe kind of on the fence about using Realtor, look, we are going to make you more money than what you might be able to do if you were to just do this as a FSBO, because the median is that different. If the median is that different, that means that the realtors are working extra hard to get more value for the clients. But beyond that, the rest of the stuff is just statistical information. You can take it or leave it, but those two sections, there's a very specific context that could be useful. Just keep in mind that these numbers can't be compared directly. The top of this chart is 250. The top of this chart is 300. The beginning of this chart is October. The beginning of this chart is January. So if you are comparing these two, make sure that you guys are using a direct apples to apples comparison of saying this is October, that kind of stuff. Anyway, neighbors tab just shows any of the people in the immediate vicinity of the property. Just like we saw in the comparables tab, you can go up to the search criteria and make some slight adjustments to who's showing on here. But I haven't had a particularly positive experience with the neighbors tab in the past. Sometimes, you guys have probably heard similar refrains from buyers or sellers, but sometimes showing this information might be kind of a mixed blessing. If they just want to see, who their neighbors are whenever they move in, cool, I guess. But oftentimes, if they end up seeing, maybe names that they're not familiar with, or maybe are in a different language, or if they see that there's a bunch of companies that own properties in the vicinity because there's a bunch of rentals, they could have, some preconceived notions of what it's like in that neighborhood. So I'm not particularly fond of it, just because it might illustrate some of the prejudice of the people that you're working with, but it could be of some value. I just don't usually see a good usage case for it. So that's our neighbors tab. The last option is our neighborhood profile. This is going to be more generalized information, and I wish that, like on market trends here, it actually shows this is the area that we're getting the information for. When you go to the neighborhood profile, it doesn't clarify that this is actually talking about the zip code and the estimated population of that zip code, the age breakdown in that zip code, the gender breakdown in that zip code, and so on and so forth. Now, some of this information could be really useful If you guys do have somebody that's maybe, let's say that they're in their late 30s, it's a guy, he's single, he wants to, hopefully find somebody to live in his nice big house with him now. So yeah, it looks like there's a decent amount of women in that area, and there's also a decent amount of people that aren't married. A little further down, we can see our housing median home sales price. We've got how many properties are owned versus rented. It looks like there's a little bit more rented than owned. We've got a bunch of vacant properties as well. Here's our rental prices. Here's our quality of life, showing how many people are in different industries, white collar versus blue collar, what the household incomes are. So it looks like most of these people are under 200,000, or all of them are actually, excuse me. Here's our average household. Uh, Bear in mind, this is actually one of the few sections that has an average without showing you a median. So the median might actually be higher than this, uh, but the average household income is actually lower because maybe there's a lot of outliers in this area, or you guys might see the average be thrown off by somebody in the area that has like a, huge mansion or something, and they make, millions and millions of dollars. They might throw off the average just because that's the only person that makes that much, whereas everybody else might be under, which actually is technically the case. This used to have a bunch of people that were in a much higher income bracket. It's actually changed over time. But commute method is shown, the weather is shown. This is actually, in my opinion, anytime somebody's saying quality of life, I'm not thinking about the workers there. What I'm thinking about is what it's actually like to live there. And this is actually one of the few indications of what it's like. But median travel times, 18 minutes. Most people that live in this zip code are typically not traveling too far from that zip code to go to work. Here's our local businesses. This is something that we do have the option to change in the search criteria. You can change which business categories show up, how far away you want to go. So like if you don't want to see businesses that are too far from the property, you can change that. You can also change whether or not you're seeing shopping, eating, travel. If we get rid of stuff, like maybe I just want to see the shopping and eating part, I can save that as my default or submit it just for this particular property. We also have the schools. Notice that this is still going to be showing us what the schools are according to a proximity search. It's not actually showing us all of the schools that this child would go to if they lived in this property. This is showing us everything that's in the vicinity, whether it's a middle school, combined school, so on and so forth. There are 9 options to choose from here. If you guys want to get rid of anything, you can. But I'm going to leave mine there. Go ahead and submit. So my local businesses, I've got it still set to within a mile. Here's all the food. Here's all the shopping. Again, some of this information might be valuable. So like, let's say we still got that single guy that's wanting to see, all right, well, there's a Red Lobster nearby for a first date. Cool. As time goes on, maybe we go to Alibaba. There's a Sonic for once we're really comfortable with each other. Got a Qdoba. And then later on down the line, oh, you know what? I don't think my example is going to work anymore. There used to be a jewelry store that was in this area. You could finally get the guy a girlfriend and engagement ring, maybe. But looks like the jewelry store is gone, so that might be a selling point for him. Is less pressure. Anyway, so all this information can be printed off on a report. Now we've seen these 2 buttons down here at the bottom on all of the tabs except for market trends, where it only had the option to print. But whenever we're doing the print option, it's going to do either quick print or customize. Quick print is just going to take whatever tab that we happen to be on. So in this case, if I'm on property details and click print, the quick print will give me just this particular tab. So it's not going to show me all the comparables and the businesses nearby. It's only going to be showing me just the information about this particular property. If I wanted to get more information, I can go to the print, customize print. This gives me the choice between seeing the property detail, the comparables, the neighbors and neighborhood profile, so that way, if we want somebody to have a more complete vision of what this particular property is like, similar to how RPR does things, we can see the property detail, the comparables, and the neighborhood profile, and just dump all of those into one PDF and send that off to the client after we've gotten it downloaded. So this one's a little bit more complete. You'll see that there's actually the details over here on the side, so you can quickly jump to what the population summary is, or maybe what businesses are nearby, so on and so forth. So the PDFs are pretty nice. And again, they're a little bit quicker to produce than the RPR stuff. Doesn't include quite as much information. And as you saw, there's not quite as much polish as what the RPR details will show, but still could be useful. There is also an email option that either takes this particular tab, or again, we get the customize option. And what this one does is, instead of actually producing a PDF that I'm going to have to either download or open up to view, what this does is it actually adds this particular PDF to an email. I'm going to have to clarify who the reply to will be. So if the client responds to this, where's the email going to go? But we just need to type in who this is going to go to. There we go. And then when we send this, this is actually just going to send off a link to the PDF with whatever subject and body that I've added to that email. So this is great if you guys have investors that are trying to learn about a property. You get the comparables so that they know what the prices might be in the area. You get the neighborhood profile pulled up so that they can learn more about what the population is like, how many people are doing what the rental prices might be if they're wanting to turn this investment into a rental. All of that information is available to them. All right, so let's move back. So now that we've gone through and found some properties or even looked at a particular report, now let's talk about how useful this map function is. So before we do anything else, like searching with the map or adding any details to it, it's important to note that all of the search functionality for the map is going to be dependent on being on the My Search option. Recently, they did add the option, I think this was actually in the last few months, that if you're on the quick search and you try to add to the map, it should automatically switch you over to My Search. But just keep in mind that you have to be on that My Search function in order for it to be able to track that information down. But what we're going to do is I'm actually going to take the search function over here on the left and actually collapse that down so that I can have a little bit more space for my map. This is going to be a little icon up here at the top. It's the double arrow pointing to the left. And you'll notice that it actually leaves a nice big white tab with the little search function here, the little magnifying glass. Click on that, it'll expand it back out, and you can contract that. So notice how much extra screen real estate that gives us. If you guys are going to be using the map search to find something, it might actually be a good idea to just collapse that down so that you can focus on the map that you're searching on. Now, I also want to get rid of my search results down here at the bottom because this isn't really helping me right now. So I'm going to just go to map, and notice that that slides the list portion of it down to the bottom. I can still pull that back up if I wanted to see my results by clicking on this bar here. This also allows me to, if I just wanted to maybe collapse it just a little bit, and it just automatically puts me back into a split view. But if I click on map, it makes the map the priority. Click on list, makes the list the priority. But for now, let's take a look at how the map displays. So when we're looking at the map, by default, it's going to be on the roadmap option. As we zoom in, you'll start seeing that the streets will get names. The further we zoom in, the smaller the streets are that will get named. And also the further we zoom in, we start seeing the parcels appearing on the map. So we can see these parcel lines are actually indicating to us where a particular property is located. And if I click on one of those parcels, it's going to actually pull up the information about that particular parcel with the address up here at the top, who the owner is, how many beds, baths, the last sales price. Again, notice this is preferring the MLS details. Then at the bottom, we've actually got a few icons. We've got a little quick zoom, which is going to make sure that this is centered in the screen. We've got a lot dimensions or parcel dimensions, which is actually going to show us an estimate of how many feet each side of the parcel's lines are. And then we also have the option to see any of the previous listing details. Now we see here that this is actually an MLS sales price, MLS sales date. So there's got to have been a listing on this previously. So when I click on this direct link to MLS, it's actually going to pull up that same history search that we saw earlier. So the same thing that we did whenever we were looking at the report, we clicked on the link of the MLS number and it pulled up that history report. This works that exact same way. We can just click on any property. So if I just saw a house in here, click on it. Looks like it's got an MLS. Click on the link and I see that most recent listing, which is back in 2009. So if there is actually a live listing for this particular property, you may also notice that there's photos that have been added. Let's see if I can try. Oh, perfect, actually. Here we got the property that actually sold in 2020. We can see some of the details about the property, including, thankfully, the MLS bedroom count. But underneath here, we can go directly into the listing, but we also have the option now, since this is a listing that had some photos added to it, I can click on this property photo button and it'll pull up a little slideshow for us to use. I can switch in between the photos here. We can learn more about the house that way. Ooh, it's lovely. How pretty. Cool. So very handy. Go ahead and zoom out here. Let's say that I actually wanted to change up how this is actually showing the details on the map. Up here at the top right next to our zoom in, zoom out buttons, we can switch between road map, a satellite view, which actually just shows just the satellite view, and we only see the parcel lines now. We don't see any street names or anything else. But when we're on the satellite view, we can also switch to the hybrid view, which shows the satellite and the street names. So if you guys just want to see, the lines, you don't need to have any clutter of the street names or any other details on the map, like business names, stuff like that. Switch it over to satellite view. If you want to see the street names, because clearly we need to get some context for where things are physically located, we can switch over to hybrid view so that we can see, oh, there's the name of the lake, there's the name of the street around the lake. And then we can also switch to a terrain view, which really didn't do much of anything because Oklahoma is very flat. Let's get it over to where there is some curvature to the area. Where's Turkey Creek or Turkey Mountain? Here we go. All right, Turkey Mountain. Here we can see what the terrain view does for us. It actually adds in not only that little bit of shading to show us where the curves are, but it also adds in these lines showing us the elevation as well. So if you guys needed to find out how high something is. So for instance, I grew up in Colorado and I'm looking at Turkey Mountain here, and this doesn't even get too much over 800 feet. That doesn't qualify as a mountain. But that's because I had the Rocky Mountains in my backyard. So anyway, the terrain view is available if you guys would like it. I typically recommend to people that you're using the roadmap option. The terrain view is okay, but again, it might either end up adding some shading in an area that you don't want there to be shading, or it might just be showing nothing because it's, a flat area like in this Imhoff section here. But we've got our roadmap option. That's the best option. This is also going to be the quickest to load. So for instance, if I switch over to a satellite view or a hybrid view, it's going to take a little bit of extra time to load in. And the slower your internet connection is, the more likely that is that it's going to take a little bit extra time to load. So if you're working rurally or if you guys are out on the road really far, you might end up wanting to adjust that according to your internet connection. Now let's next talk about the search functions that you have on the map. So we can zoom in, zoom out, we can click on parcels or whatnot. But let's talk about how to actually search within an area. So let's say that I had a certain spot that I wanted to search for properties. Maybe I wanted to start getting into this market here. I know that there's a couple people that might be interested in selling their house. So I'm going to actually start creating, let's say, some labels for flyers, or maybe even get Home Visit to create some postcards for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use this drawing tool. Now you saw me use this earlier when there was a little problem with my search, but this time I'm actually going to be a little bit more conscientious of it. We've got a radius tool that allows us to click and drag. This is going to search any property that has any overlap within this shape. So if I click on this and run my search, this is going to find all of the properties that have any overlap, which means that this might not provide me everything that I'm interested in because it's grabbing a bunch of stuff across the street. It's grabbing a bunch of stuff to the east and south. This is not what I'm interested in. I wanted just this area right here. If it had a subdivision name, I could search for it by that. But if I'm wanting to make sure that I'm finding anything and everything, hit clear all so I can start over from scratch. I'm actually going to use this rectangle tool, and we're just going to draw right here. There we go. So this is going to be a little bit more narrowed search focused. So this time when I run my search, looks like I still got this spare dingleberry here and this one and this one. So I can go into my search results. So like if I click back over to our split view, I can actually find this particular property, click on it on the map, uncheck it. Click on this next one over here, found it, uncheck it. And last one down here, uncheck it. Looks like it's pulling up some city information. Oh, state of Oklahoma. Wow, yeah, we definitely don't need that one. Uncheck that. Perfect. Now I've got my results narrowed down. Now, if I ended up running my reports, I can switch between only the properties in that subdivision that I was interested in. But the last option on here, and this is the one that I usually recommend people try to familiarize themselves with, is the polygon tool. So radius is restricted to just a perfect circle emanating from a central point. The rectangle tool can occasionally grab everything that we might be needing if it's in a nice rectangular shape. Like this section down here would be a perfect example. Boom, I got everything I needed. Cool. But let's say that I do end up having some strange shapes. That's where the polygon tool comes into play. So this one, I can actually curate. I'm just going to grab from here, come around the street. Each click becomes a corner. So this way, whenever I'm clicking through, I'm only going to be trying to overlap my shape on the properties that I'm interested in. So now when I end up running my search for this property, I've still got this dingleberry of the state of Oklahoma, but again, that's just, if I'm searching next to a highway, there's a very good likelihood of that, just fair warning. But now I've got only the properties I need. I don't have to click through and try and uncheck a bunch of checkboxes. And actually, I gave an example of the labels. I might as well clarify. I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but we're just going to talk about the map for just a little bit longer. So it's an easy way to run a search. You notice that whenever we end up adding a shape to our map, it actually adds that as a criteria over under the My Search section, which is again why the My Search is the preference for searching by the map. It's important to recognize that this is being treated like any other criteria. So if you guys ever wanted to get rid of it, especially if you have maybe a whole bunch of shapes on the map at the same time, I think you can have up to 7 on Realist. It's either 5 or 7. This will be the moment of truth. Yeah, you can only draw 5 shapes in Realist, 7 shapes in Matrix. Let's say that I did end up having one that was maybe not the right one. I can click on it and delete shape from here, or you can delete shape over here on the left and get rid of any of the shapes that you no longer need. All right, I'm going to collapse this all back and we'll go back to just our map view. So in addition to being able to change how the map is actually displayed on the screen, we do also have the option to change the boundaries that are being displayed. Now, by default, the system default shows the parcel lines. I would very strongly recommend that you never remove that option. We do have some people call in and in panic because they're like, well, I know where the property is located and I can click on it if I zoom in close enough and I can see where the lines are that Google has added, but these are not necessarily the exact parcel lines according to the county. If I want to see those county parcel lines, I need to click on the parcel button and it'll actually reinforce those lines on there. So we also have the option to add in any zip code lines. Let me zoom out just a little bit here. So if I add in the zip code, it's going to show me where each of the zip code lines are. And it's going to also allow us to see this grid of what that particular property or what that particular zip code is according to the map. So we can see this zip code line coming down here. If we add in the city lines, I don't think I'm far enough. Oh, I am far enough south. Here's some Jinx city lines. And then here's Tulsa up here. So as I'm going through, you notice down here at the bottom, I've got 3 out of 6 selected. Let's add in our school district lines. Here's all the Jinx public school. Looks like it's all Jinx where I'm at. I'm gonna scroll up just a little bit. Here's a line here for Tulsa Public Schools. Here's Sapulpa Public Schools, Berry Hill, so on and so forth. So you see each of those lines, but notice things are starting to get a little cluttered. I'm at 4 out of 6 selected. Now we're going to add in the one thing that everybody always seems to want to know how to do, the flood zones. Now, when I've added in my flood zones, all of a sudden my map went from being a little bit cluttered to just being almost next to useless because there's just so much information on the map. In fact, it's even having trouble, I'm hoping it's not slowing down our webinar, but it's even having trouble trying to produce the information on the map. I've got Oakhurst over here in green, which is apparently the city. I'm no longer seeing my zip code lines. If I zoom in, all of a sudden those start flooding my map as well. I've got my school district showing up here in yellow. It's just way too much information. If I go back over here to my boundaries, that 5 out of 6 selected is kind of indicating to me this is just way too much. Now, we can either uncheck our checkboxes from the boundaries here, or let's say that I don't remember where it was because there's some other options in here that we're going to be adding in a moment. If I don't really want the map to be this cluttered, down here at the bottom under the legends, we actually have the option to just get rid of any of those extra details just by hitting an X to the right of it. We can do the same thing for the flood zones, but now that I've cleared out all of that extraneous information, notice the flood zones don't seem quite as impractical to view as it used to be. So this might be beneficial for you guys to see this information. You can even print this off if you guys wanted to show a certain section. All of the details about these flood zones are actually coming over directly from FEMA. So these are actually the technical names of each of the flood zone sections here. So if you have clients that are asking about things, you may end up needing to direct them to reach out to FEMA about this. Just for your own edification, the floodway is indicating where flood waters will move, and a floodplain is indicating where flood waters will rest. Just anyway, we also have the 500-year floodway and floodplain. Just so you guys are aware, we actually ended up, I think it was 2019. I actually ended up going to Bartlesville the day after there was that really huge flood that ended up hitting the whole state. And there was a bunch of areas that were in the 500-year flood zone that were just underwater. And that was actually the second time that we got hit by a once every 500-year flood. But in that situation, and I think I can show you guys here. Here it is. That property that I was showing you guys earlier, the Riverside, they actually had their property line adjusted after the fact. So after those 2 floods in 2019, they ended up deciding, well, maybe we weren't right about the 500 years. So the flood zone actually shifted from in front of their house to immediately behind their house, which ended up causing them to decide not to sell their house. Just funny side note. Anyway, clear all of those off. But that's available to you guys. Also, it's worth mentioning in Matrix, we actually have the Tulsa County flood zones in there as well. Realist does not have that information included. But I'm going to get rid of the flood zones. We also have the option to add in property and sales information. So if you guys wanted to see any of the properties that have sold in the last 3 months, according to the tax records, we can check that checkbox for sales and values, and it'll show a little pin on each of the properties that had actually changed hands. So if I click on this particular property, there we go. If I click on this particular property, I can learn more about it by going into the report, and we can see whether or not this particular, like this one, here's a perfect example. This property right here actually didn't change hands thanks to the MLS. It looks like this actually ended up having some kind of sale or something that occurred outside. So, and it's not even recorded quite yet. Interesting. Yeah. We also have the option to add in any of the MLS active, pending, expired, or sold listings. One combination that I actually recommend you guys play with at some point is tax sales. So adding that onto the map and then also adding the MLS sales. We can see some overlap on here. So like this property that was over here, we saw that it was actually something that had been listed, but you can see that there's a little bit of overlap on the property there. So if I zoom back out, I can see a property over here that actually just had, here we go. We got a property here that was just on the sales or the tax side. Same thing with this one over here. Meanwhile, we've got these properties that actually sold very recently that don't have their tax records up to date yet. So they sold in the MLS, but they have not been recognized as sold on the tax records. So I'm going to uncheck both of those, or I could hit the X at the bottom there. There's also some sales trends. This trending chart allows us to see median sales price, what the AVMs are. All of this is going to be broken down on the zip code by default. Oklahoma doesn't have codified neighborhoods, so leaving it on that zip code option is the best choice. But whenever we click on one of these trends, what it's going to do is it's going to color that entire zip code in according to whatever the measurements are. So in this case, we can see the legend is showing under 100,000 for the median sales price, 100 to 200, 200, 300, 300, 400, 500. So it looks like there's at least some information in here that's going to be really highly valued. So all of these areas here. And then we also have a little bit less, and so on. Now, I did also want to point out up here at the top, it says control click. If you are on a Mac, it's going to be a command click. But let's say that I actually wanted to find out the specifications of 74120. I'm going to hold down control and then click, and it highlights that particular zip code and then shows me, all right, this is the rolling 3-month. The last time we actually got the exact measurements are in December, because that's the last time I was comfortable solidifying all the data, all the tax records, all the MLS records, so on and so forth, to produce a median home price. Now, I did want to just address one outlier, especially for those of you guys who might be working really far outside of the city. When you're looking at some of these zip codes that are really far away and they have that median home value, there is a very good chance that it might be getting thrown off by something. So like Sisakwa, I'm not sure how to pronounce that properly, what the native pronunciation is, but whenever I click on that zip code, you notice that the value is way higher than any of the neighboring zip codes. This is out in the middle of nowhere, so it's kind of surprising that the value is so high. I can switch over in the trends to the sales activity, and you notice this probably has barely anything that's sold in that area. So I'm going to do a control click again. This time, instead of it showing me the median sales value, it's going to show me how many properties sold in that area in the last 3 months. This particular zip code, only one property sold. So instead of giving me an accurate depiction of like how many different properties had sold in that area, giving me a median value that's of some use to me, it literally was just showing me that this one particular property sold for that amount of money. So just bear that in mind. Some of these trending sections might need to be balanced by looking at some of the other details on there. Finally, we have our points of interest that you can add. So if you guys, let's say you're out in Ada and you want to make sure that you have that client that, you know, they're a little bit elderly, they want to make sure that there's a hospital nearby that can sufficiently help them. Ada has a very famous medical industry that started after World War II. So they've got some really good hospitals and services. So if I wanted to check the checkbox here for healthcare, I can see it add that extra information onto the map. I think I need to zoom in further for it to show up. There we go. It looks like Ada's not providing their information on that front. That's disappointing. That should have been a good example. Anyway, we also have the driving directions. Now, one of the cool things about driving directions and also this one over here that's just locate on map is that if you do have a property's parcel number, so let's say that you have that piece of vacant land that's out in the middle of nowhere, it doesn't have a 911 address, but you still need to find directions to it. What you can do is actually put in the address for one place, South Lewis Avenue. This is starting at ORU. And we're going to drive out to that Riverside address. If I did put in just the parcel number, I would just need to put in comma and then the county, get my directions, and I'm good to go. And then you can email this out to a client. So like if you did have a buyer that wanted to go take a look at some property, instead of having to be like, well, it's, 5 miles past the gas station, there's a little mile marker on the side. No, instead, you guys can just get the directions. It's going to be a lot easier to understand. And again, since it's actually basing it on the mapping according to the tax records and using the parcel number, it's going to give you a lot more accurate directions. Now, again, you do also have the option to just put in an address alone. So if you guys just wanted to put in an address in there, just find out where that is on the map, and maybe you needed to explore the area because you're like, oh, you know what, what's the place nearby look like? We can go to a report and find out more. So a lot of cool tools up here at the top. If you guys do end up wanting to produce any kind of print offs or labels or anything like that, you can use this area. You can make annotations and measurements, setting up whatever you need to kind of measure out an area. You can add in an annotation and say, pool in the back. There we go. And then print this off. We also have the option to print off any of the search results. So for instance, if we had actually run a search in this area and we wanted to try and provide all of those results to a client that we were talking to, we can run our search, hit print, and we can provide them either all of the reports, all the map and table, which means that it's going to show me the map up here at the top with all of the dots on it, and then all of the details about the property that can fit on a page. We can print off just the map, which includes my annotations, or just the results. And there's also a cards view, which I'm not particularly fond of, but it is available if you guys just want to search in an area that has a lot of properties that have recently been for sale. If I switch over to list view, it should switch between card view and list view up here at the top. So fairly simple to switch between those. If you guys do end up liking the split view, it's always going to keep it on this list view, but you can always switch that around. You can also customize the list view by clicking and dragging. So if you guys wanted to adjust things there, but you also have further customization under Customize Table, where you can actually add in extra details. You can rearrange them a little bit easier over here on the side. Like if I wanted to put all of the zip code, county, blah, 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 all of that together, hit apply, and it rearranges that on here for me. Then finally, there is actually a label printing function, as well as a postcards function that we don't cover. The labels are very simple. You click labels, make sure that you have only the ones that you want to print checked, and you can choose between any of the default Avery options you can buy at Staples, Office Max, whatever. I usually recommend the use all capital letters just in case you have somebody that's like a McGonagall and they don't want to see the lowercase g, or use the tax billing address and then make sure to show current owner so that you get the owner's name on there. You can eliminate duplicate labels in case there's the same person owns a bunch of properties within the area that you're searching. Just hit create, and it actually puts it all into a Word document that you guys can use and just run that straight through your printer, and that'll go directly into the directly onto the labels. And of course, since it's a Word file, you can also go through and make adjustments. So like, let's say we know that TJ's wife died, we can remove the bereaved wife or husband, excuse me. Anyway, that's it for our class today. I just realized it's 11 on the dot. So I'm gonna go ahead and close up shop. If you guys do end up having any questions or problems, as you saw, get in contact with us over at the service desk and we can help you out. But thank you guys so much for joining us today. If you do have any needs whatsoever in regards to the MLS, just get in contact with us. We're more than willing to help. We do have somebody that checks the email after hours too. So if you guys do have a question and it's not between 8 to 5:30 Monday through Friday, you can always reach out to us by email. But thank you so much for joining us. If you do end up having any issues, we'll talk to you then. Stay safe, guys.